The world around us is a world of appearances. What we see is what we think we see. Seeing is literally thinking, with the eye carrying the visual sense data that the mind interprets. To define something, anything, to give it a name, is to limit our experience of it. It is in the dynamic interplay of knowing things as defined objects and knowing them purely as phenomena that takes place in our mind that is the playing field of the reality we create for ourselves. In that highly image-producing part of the mind, where thought has no name, the constant is in relationships that demand creation, destruction, transformation. Nothing in the universe, as both ancient wisdom and modern physics inform us, is ever lost, only transformed. In the early years of my involvement with found objects, I found myself thrust into a world which I looked at as a child would before having learned to give things names. I had been trained as a science teacher, which gave me a highly structured way of understanding the world. I was running a biology laboratory, and despite this, I had to permit my mind to open to as much unstructuring as I felt safe with. I was living in relative isolation in a small bungalow on the south shore of Long Island. I had chosen this setting because I loved the ocean and had a special interest in marine biology. I had become familiar with life along the shore and walked the beaches constantly. I had always loved the drama and beauty of nature, but it seems at this time and place I began a shift in consciousness that was to lead me to experience the world and the things in it purely as phenomena. Instead of the shells of various crustacea and mollusks I had collected and classified, I now found myself bringing home a sackful of carefully chosen driftwood that had washed up on the beach. For a long time, I simply lived with a growing collection of driftwood. It seemed to connect me in an elemental way with the universe itself. I seemed to grasp intuitively the story each piece evoked, revealed in the often dramatic shape it had taken as it confronted the wild forces of the sea. I found I was investing them with the same sense of heroic struggle that I imagined my own life to be. Then, unexpectedly, on one memorable evening, as I sat on the floor, extracting the pieces of wood from my collecting sack, like caught fish absorbed with their pungent aroma and the unique forms they had been molded into by the sea, and feeling a sense of excitement, I found myself evoking images from them that led to the production of the Driftwood series. I found that being in nature stimulated a subtle shift in consciousness that I had never paid much attention to. I became dramatically aware of it when I focused on the wood without attempting to analyze it, but began simply to experience it as phenomena. And it took me a number of years before I felt at ease and adept enough to shift my attention between these two states of awareness. I have no clear recollection of exactly when I began to turn my attention to the world of man-made objects. Charged with experience in a human world, they were to become mirrors and surrogates, symbols of my attempt to explore the nature of identity. I was well aware of Eastern metaphysics, which saw the world as Maya or illusion, had tried meditation, which I found difficult, yet was trained in the analytical Western mode, which is bound to a dualistic perception of reality that separates the viewer from the thing viewed in order to construct an identity, rather than knowing it through direct experience, where the viewer and the thing viewed are understood as a single event. Intellectually, I understood that all matter was basically electrical, and that the wave-particle theory of quantum physics had brought the two states into close accord. Slowly, going back to early memories, like a child using the simplest of objects, containers, I began an inner and outer journey that was to hatch for a wide assortment of objects consigned to oblivion, a second life in another identity. I made no attempt to embellish or paint these or subsequent objects I used, so that they might retain their original identities as natural or man-made objects. The growing mass of objects I surrounded myself with were kept as visible as space permitted. I would have 3 or 4 promising works in progress, and I found myself trying to catch them off guard when they might reveal the completion of a new image, or a fruitful metamorphosis if a single object. There was no way of knowing when or if this would happen, and in a sense, I became a hunter of images and ideas, stalking an elusive prey in the jungle of my mind, losing all sense of time. Early on, what was most challenging was to have the object's previous identity define its new visual concept as much as possible, making the most from the least, that elegant principle known in science. Some successful examples of this are acrobats, a rusted tricycle that I dug out of the beach sand, duck, an inverted chair leg, head of Balzac, a large inverted metal coffee pot, French sailor boy, a crushed Tonka toy Jeep, which I did paint, meeting in Kyoto, a pair of toy plastic tools, suggestive of a Japanese lord and lady with a parasol. Football kicker, which is a stapler. Bugs, which are Catch's knee pads. Bike writer, the tuna part of an old TV set. Toreador, the skeletonized fibrous remnant of a plant. And ballerina and satyr, which are driftwood. Using assemblage techniques, some interesting works developed, such as 1926 Chrysler sedan, a tour de force using 7 different kinds of tin containers, and Sylvania Super 10 glass train, using a variety of chemical glassware. These pieces marked the culmination of my work with containers, as ballerina and satyr had marked my work with driftwood. What I began to fully appreciate was how, as individuals, we ground ourselves in the interplay of ideas and associated images imprinted in our mind during childhood, when we are so vulnerable to impressions. As the years go by, we fill in the details of our world picture, which remains relatively unchanged until we experience some major upheaval that may throw us back into that shadowy world where thought meets the ripe imagination. What I finally came to understand, working with and experiencing the physical world and the objects in it as phenomena, was how deeply the Western mind is entrained to defining, constructing, and classifying the world, fabricating identities, and believing them to be absolute. I directed my efforts primarily towards bringing youngsters my insights into the imaginative process. I was aware that our capacity to know the world and the self are expanded to the degree to which the left brain, or more accurately, the left hemisphere of the neocortex, where logic, abstract language, and classification are seated, draws upon the right hemisphere's mode of experiencing intuitively. At about the age of 12, there is a shift from the right to left hemisphere mode that increasingly becomes the main mode by which the child relates to the world. It is that intelligence of the left hemisphere that maintains the unity and well-being of the play of consciousness unfolding in the child. In about 1973, winding down my career in science education, I converted a school bus into a mobile museum and went back into the schools with a project called Discoveries in Sculpture, a seminar and workshop designed to guide youngsters, primarily from ages 6 to 12, in exploring the richness of their imaginative faculties. I allowed into the project the formal ideas of balance and form, understanding that the degree to which both hemispheres of the brain were tapped into, whether in a disciplined field of study such as science, or exploring one's intuitive abilities in a creative field, would determine the authority of what was ultimately produced. On occasion, I had the opportunity to present this understanding to science students and teachers. In our educational institutions, with their analytical point of view, little attention is paid to whole brain entrainment that permits us to know ourselves and the world we create for ourselves more completely. Van Gogh, a passionate man of vital intellect who dropped about as deep as any artist ever had into the source of imagery formation, unlike the Impressionists, who were basically very rational, lived to the limits of his struggle to chart his imagery onto canvas and paid for it with his life. It reveals the astounding passage of the world about to collapse into pure phenomena. Compare that to Cézanne, who spent a lifetime trying to put it back together. As for my own work with the transformed object, from about 1965 to 1985, aside from the single works shown in Tiffany's windows and some galleries, the larger ensembles have never been shown. Their value, I believe, has to rest not on any specific object transformed, but in the broad context of a personal struggle to understand how the mind plays image and idea into a constantly changing kaleidoscope of identity.